Hello, welcome to this new podcast called Frisian Contemplationist, which is, of course, a mixed word, Contemplatonist. It is contemplating and Platonist, as I am a Platonist or Neoplatonist in my philosophy and ideas. And I am, of course, from Friesland or Frisia, which is a small part of the Netherlands, which has a very ancient culture. The Frisian peoples were, in fact, Vikings before they were called Vikings. And what I am trying to do is, of course, I had some more videos on my channel about the nature of reality. But I'm working on a moral system that can remedy basically the moral degeneration that we are facing today. We are living in a crisis. Everything is about individualism, materialism, consumerism, and morality doesn't really seem to be a big player in our societies in the West. And we can see this. It's morality plays a role insofar as it is a tool that makes people feel good about themselves while doing things that may in fact not be all that great. One example that comes to mind, for instance, is all these people that drive electric cars. They want to project into the world that they are doing the right thing, that they are in fact moral human beings, that they are concerned with the well-being of the planet and stuff like that. But almost all electric car owners know that the raw materials for the batteries are being mined in countries like the Congo and Africa with child labor and slave labor and a lot of death and destruction every year. It's just in order to get the raw materials for these batteries. This is the same, for instance, with a lot of solar panels from China. They are made in slave labor camps where they have these re-education camps in which they keep the Uyghur people. So we don't really care about morality. It is just that we want to show to the world that we are concerned, but it is as shallow as can be. It has no substance. So what we need is a model of morality that is rooted in reality, because the problem always has been, when we talk about morality, we ask ourselves a question. Can there be a morality without God? Because if you are of the determinist, materialist inclination, and you think that reality and the cosmos are nothing more than the products of happenstance, if you insist on that model, then ultimately there isn't anything in which you could say it is right or wrong. There isn't. If human beings kill each other on this planet, there isn't anything or anyone out there in the cosmos concerned with the fact that we are doing so. So this has been a major hurdle to getting a objective morality. And of course, the discussions about objective morality or about the lack of morality in existence in the world, in reality, is millennia old, and I'm not pretending that I can solve any difficult discussion like that. However, I believe that from reality itself, from the structure of reality itself, we can derive a moral structure. So what I did was I based myself on a book, or I based my philosophy on a book by Jan Smuts. It is rather obscure, and to English-speaking people, a name like Smuts is of course hilarious. To me, I still find that name hilarious. But he was an important man in South African culture and history. He was a statesman, but he was also a philosopher, and he wrote a book called Evolution, Holism and Evolution, in which he states a very interesting fact, that nature operates on the principle that it creates wholes from parts, and that these wholes have emergent properties that the parts in themselves do not. So let's say we take all kinds of car parts, like a trunk lid, a shifter, a steering wheel, a window, an engine. All of these parts together form the car, and if you screw them together in the right way, you end up with something that has qualities that the parts of themselves do not, namely a vehicle that has automotion. So the carness of a car is an emergent property and is not to be found in its constituent parts. Now there is one clear distinction we have to make between a car as a machine. A machine is it can be taken apart and put together again, and it will work fine just as it did before. With biological life, that is of course different. We cannot take human beings or animals apart and put them together again. They will simply be deceased. So nature and the structure of nature and the structure of reality is not machine-like in any way. It is something different from machines. And machines, of course, are only good insofar as their utility goes. If they operate according to the intent behind the design of the machine, if it fulfills its duty, or not its duty, if it fulfills its the work it was designed to do, then it is a good machine. And for human beings, of course, it is quite different. So what Smuts very interesting said that holism is the fundamental factor operative towards the creation of the wholes in the universe. So there's a driving force, a driving factor in reality that creates complexity. All right. So, and he says that this complexity is to be found in a number of layers. So from the simplest to the most complex. And I will read you an excerpt from his book. The ascending order of wholes, or the stages in which holism expresses itself in the progressive phases of reality, may therefore be roughly and provisionally summarized as follows. First, definitive material structure or syntheses of parts in natural bodies, but with no more internal activity known at present than that of mere physical or chemical forces or energies, e.g. in a chemical compound. And then the next layer is functional structure in living bodies, where the parts of this specific synthesis become actively cooperative and function jointly for the maintenance of the body, for instance in a plant. The next level up is the specific cooperative activity becomes coordinated or regulated by some marked central control, which is still mostly implicit and unconscious, for instance in an animal. And then the next level up is in human so the central control becomes conscious and culminates in personality. At the same time, it emerges in more composite holistic groups in society. So that would be the level of human beings. And in human associations, this central control becomes super individual in the state and similar group organizations. Finally, there emerge the ideal wholes, or holistic ideals, or absolute values, disengaged and set free from human personality and operating as creative factors on their own account in the upbuilding of a spiritual world. Such are the ideals of truth, beauty, and goodness, which lay at the foundations of a new order in the universe. Through all these stages, we see the ever-deepening nature of the whole as a specific structural synthesis of parts with inner activities of its own, which cooperate and function in harmony, either naturally or instinctively or consciously. These parts so cooperate and co-function towards a definite inherent inner end or purpose that together they constitute and form a whole more or less of a distinctive character with an identity and an ever-increasing measure of individuality of its own. The functioning of the parts is influenced by their place in the milieu of other parts, and the whole and parts thus reciprocally constitute and determine each other. Alright, so what he says is that things come together and there are emergent properties. So at the first level, for instance, we could think of molecules or atoms even. You can have atoms. When atoms come together and form a molecule, the molecule has qualities that the atoms in themselves have not. The molecules have chemical properties, so they can react with other molecules. Now different molecules put together can form a biological cell, for instance. So now the molecules together form a cell, and the cell has qualities that the molecules do not. A cell has a metabolism, has a cell lining, it has a nucleus, and it has so these emergent properties. And this goes all the way up. So cells form organs, organs form the body. The body is the individual, is the human being, and the human being is a part of his family, of his nuclear family. And the nuclear family is part of the extended family. The extended family is part of the folk or the race, and this in turn is part of the of humanity basically. And then you end up with these super personal, as Smuts calls it, properties, which are these ideals. And I go a step beyond that, and I must reference Chris Langan's cognitive theoretical model of the universe. And I would say that God, or at least ultimate reality, as Chris Langan calls it, is in fact the ultimate whole, but it is also the ultimate part. And we will discuss this later. Because this is an introductory video to explain the entire philosophy of what I'm working on, which I call moral holism. So I believe that the thing that, or the philosophy that Smuts laid out regarding basically the mechanism in which evolution takes place, he does not necessarily attach any moral value to this. And what I'm working on is, through the system and approach of Smuts, apply the ideas and philosophy that naturally flow from this principle that wholes have emergent properties that the parts do not. So the very fact that there is this structure of from the smallest parts to the biggest parts in reality dictates in fact that there is a flow of responsibility and obligation in this structure. So if we take the human being, who is of course the whole of his organs, of his body, so he has an internal or downward responsibility to take in food, to take care of his body. He needs nutrients, he needs water, he needs vitamins, all of the things that you need to sustain the body, and he needs things that give him spiritual peace. All of these things he needs to take care of himself. So he needs to exercise, he needs to be disciplined and have his accept his responsibility and his moral position in this chain of moral duty and obligations. So he has an inward or downward obligation to himself, and he has an upward or outward responsibility to take care of his nuclear family. So the man, as a father, has to take and protect his children and his wife from whatever threats may occur. He has an obligation and duty to take care of them in the sense that he needs to provide income and housing. And this of course also is true for women, but these roles for men and women are very distinct, which we will treat more elaborately in a future episode, in which we will treat sacred feminine and sacred masculine. But so he has an upward responsibility to his family, and so the family has an upward responsibility to the extended family. So your uncles and your aunties and your all of these the members of your family that are your direct kin, your direct blood, but not necessarily in your life every day, or but there is a flow of responsibility. And as you go upward in the scale of responsibility and duty, so does the scale of the responsibility expand outwards, like ripples in a pond when you throw a rock in it, because the individual has to take care of his family has to take care of the folk, and the folk has to take care of the family, in the sense that a family cannot defend itself militarily, and a folk, or let's say a nation, in the traditional sense of the word, can form a military that protects the various families that make up the folk. Now, of course, there is an upward duty for the families to provide men which can fulfill the military duty of defending everyone. So, and these obligations extend further and further the way when you go up in this moral model, to the point that we all have an obligation, for instance, to take care of the world, of nature, of our environment, and not in this greenwash, modern sort of weird conception of nature conservation, true conservation. And we will also discuss that in a later episode. What's important to consider is that we can attach, or not, let's say, there's this entire structure. So the fact that there is a flow of obligation and duty upward and downward in the structure simply means that we can have, or that it that because the very structure of reality is shaped like this, we can say that is goodness or oughtness. It ought to be this way. Now, of course, the ages old, you cannot get an is from an ought problem still applies here. All right, so human beings can deviate from whatever nature shows us to be right, or what ought to be. Humans have free will, and they can choose to live an immoral, selfish life, or they can choose to live a moral life that adheres to the tenets of the structure of reality. And that's why I'm working on this, because the great masses of people are not concerned about morality, and the hyper-technical debates from philosophers and people who are working on these discussions, they take they alienate the average person. The average person isn't going to understand any word, basically, that philosophers exchange in long works about the philosophical intimacies of the ideas of a moral, of a objective morality, or if everything is determinist or not. So what we need is a system of morality that is quite evident in the world. So basically, a system of morality that does not appeal to any sort of metaphysics. And this might seem a bit contradictory, but this entire philosophy that I'm working on is highly metaphysical. However, there is this process and this structure of reality that I just outlined, that reality, the entirety of reality, basically consists of wholes made up of parts and emergent properties. This is something that is very demonstrable and very clear to explain to the average person who doesn't really understand philosophy. You can simply explain, just as I did, with simple examples, that reality is built up out of these syntheses of wholes and parts, and that there is an obligation that naturally flows from this very structure of reality. Yes, because the great masses must be taught a form of morality that is rooted in reality. Now, arguably, the great majority of adults are probably too polluted with the ideas of liberalism and individualism and consumerism, all of these isms that are net negative for our societies. So perhaps we have to start out with the children. Yes, indoctrination is very important. A lot of these libertarian types or right-wing types say that we are being indoctrinated with leftist ideology. This may all be very well and true, but what we would want, at least I as a thinker, would also like to indoctrinate our future generations with an idea, or at least with the notion that everything that you do reflects in, everything that you do, you have to take into considerations things that extend beyond yourself. So What this structure of reality basically dictates is that the individual, in a sense, does not exist. The individual, the term is, of course, means nothing more than something that can no longer be divided. So you cannot divide a person, a human being, without killing him. That's what the word means. But it means the modern connotation of individual basically means the contained unit. So it is a contained packet of life that has no relationship or bearing on forebears, on family, on soil, on blood, on ethnic influences, and on all of these things. It's like the idea of an individual is like there's this human being, and he's put into reality. He's thrown into life, as Heidegger would say, without any connections to anything. And this is such a blatantly false way to look at life. You have to understand that, and here we go into the metaphysical part of my theory, which I do have to reference in order to make sense of some things. There is, as I said, I'm a Platonist, so Plato believed that there were forms in the world of forms. That would be the world of being, all right? So there were perfect examples of the things that are expressed in our reality. So when we see a tree or a flower or a horse, that's merely an imperfect copy of a perfect example or perfect blueprint, a perfect form that exists in the world of being. And we live in the world of becoming. So there is something essential that exists in the world of being. And there is also something that I think exists in such a metaphysical form, and that's the essence of not just of individuals, but of the superpersonal qualities of a folk. So let's say that we call that a race soul. There's a folk soul or a race soul, a spiritual essence that exists on a metaphysical plane and that imbues an ethnic group with its qualities. So this is the metaphysical aspect that is so important as a backbone to the entire philosophy I'm working on, even though it is rooted in very earthly principles. Because I'm an idealist, I believe that reality itself is one tenacious illusion, but things can only find their expression in our perceived world if they have an essence in something that is immutable. And there is this essence of a people, of a race, and that's the race soul. So the individual does not exist in the extent that the race soul is the ongoing thread that finds temporary expressions in individual human beings. So you are a continuation, you are a momentary expression of this race soul. And all of your forebears have contributed to this race soul, have sung their songs, have told their stories, have written their books, have had their suffering, they had their moments of pleasure and of joy, they had their suffering. All of the things that a folk lived through have nourished this race soul and given it its qualities that it has. And so when you are born, you are not separate from anything. You are a link in a chain of thousands of generations of forebears, and you are now in this time the bearer and the holder of the light of your people, basically. So you exist between the inheritance of your forebears and the obligation to project the existence of your people into the future. So to that extent, the individual doesn't really exist. There is, of course, the life that this individual has, and he has within this structure of moral obligations, upward and downward, he has of course freedom to pursue his own interests, right? So he can find ways in which to express himself. It doesn't mean, the moral structure or moral holism, the philosophy of moral holism, doesn't dictate that you are a slave to these obligations and these duties that come from the very structure of nature itself. It's not like that. But the happiness comes from the fulfillment of these duties and obligations, and not pursuing happiness in and of themselves. So the individual, let's say he adapts an identity. So I'm Frisian, and if I say I am Frisian, this comes with certain obligations and certain duties. I have to speak my native tongue. I have to honor traditions that are part of my people. I have to honor certain places and place names in the area in which we live. I have to honor our history. I have to also, of course, project our existence into the future by teaching my children that we need to speak the Frisian language in order to maintain these cultural, items that we have, or cultural qualities rather. And so the identity is assumed. You take it upon yourself to identify as belonging to a certain ethnic group or a certain culture, and with that comes a lot of obligations and duties. So the individual, as I said, doesn't really exist. It is the continuous existence of the people, of the folk, of the race, that is the highest good, the most valuable. And the individual is just merely a temporal expression of this phenomena. Now, one way in which thinking has to change in respect to the individual and his relationship to his folk is, for instance, in, of course, the period that we have known as the Corona period, what was said by a lot of people was, you had, of course, the camp of people who thought that a vaccination should be mandatory, but there were also a lot of people that said, well, it must be left up to everybody, every individual, basically, to make up his mind if he wants the vaccination or not. And this is one of those typical modes of thought in the West today that is fundamentally flawed and fundamentally anti-life and anti-relationship to the moral structure of the world, because the genetic health of a population is a commons, and a commons, the entire concept of a commons, so a shared commodity that is shared by all of the people of your folk. A commons only makes sense in a web of relationships with other people, and so the entire notion of a commons has gone extinct in our world, basically. But the genetic health of your population, of your people, is a commons. All right. So it is in the best interest, in the shared common interest of your folk, that your genetic health remains optimum. And what happens if you say that every individual should make up his mind if he takes this experimental, unproven, untested vaccine, is that these individuals take a risk with the genetic quality of your people. And that is, in fact, if you accept the system of the Holist moral order, that is one of the worst offenses that you can do, that you damage a commons. And so you see that if you start to look at the world through the lens of holism and moral holism, then it becomes apparent that our societies are pathologically insane. That basically, if we look at the structure of nature, we can extrapolate how virtually every aspect of our societies could be, or should be, or ought to be, let's say, if it ought to be organized, if we want to be in harmony with the structure of reality itself. And and time again, when you look at various domains of our society in which we apply thoughts about morality and oughtness, we see that our societies, are basically 180 degrees inverse of what ought to be, and therefore it's dying, it's petering out, it has lost all of its energy, because everything that doesn't adhere to the edicts of nature simply goes extinct. We see this in the natural world all the time. That which is weak shall perish and go down under in the waves of history, never to be thought of again. And this is true for almost all cultures in the world now. There are only very few exceptions of countries and peoples that have a sort of similar sort of approach. There might be some nature people who, tribes. I mean, tribes that live close to nature in jungles or whatever. They might intuitively actually feel that there is this structure without them even being able to, formally put it into words how this structure would look. They live this reality intuitively, and but most of the societies, like China, for instance, it has, by its own claims, one of the oldest cultures in the world, and yet we see them; they are highly westernized, and it is capitalism and materialism, buying stuff, buying real estate, becoming rich, becoming millionaires, and almost all of the major countries have been afflicted by this disease. Some say that, for instance, Islam is some sort of a protection against the moral rot of our societies, but look at the major Islamic countries. They all turn a blind eye towards the tourists that come there and want to drink and want to have a good time, party, drugs, prostitutes. It's all available in countries like Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi or whatever. And of course it's illegal, and now and then they arrest some people, but for the most part it's tolerated, because if they do not, the tourists simply will not come. So money and the pursuit of money and the pursuit of material things has destroyed everything. And it is, as a certain historical figure already said, your folk, your blood is all that you have. It is the most important thing that you have, because your race and your people and your folk are the one thing that allows you to have an existence that has any meaning. And all right, so let's conclude. This was just an introductory video. What will happen in the next videos that are upcoming is that I will take all kinds of subjects or topics like war, or the sacred feminine or sacred masculine, or religiosity or ritual, or things like surrender, or the law of struggle is another book that will be treated in the same context of holism. So there's a myriad of subjects that can be treated through the lens of holism, and that will function as basically it's just an explanation in multiple videos of the entire philosophy that I'm working on. I am working on a book in which this philosophy will come, will be explained in book form. But as I feel that it is quite expedient to make these ideas known as fast as possible, therefore I'm already coming out and step by step revealing basically all of these notions and ideas, because I feel we cannot really wait any longer. If we want to affect real change in the world, you need some sort of ideological or philosophical backbone, and if you do not, you're just going to ramble about in space and have no idea in what you're doing. And I truly believe that this philosophy could function as a moral framework for in the entirety of humanity, because it embraces and celebrates basically diversity, so not the woke diversity, but true diversity. So we have the Frisians in the Netherlands, we have all kinds of cultures, and we have the French, the Germans, the Swedes, the Norwegians, and all of these cultures could be celebrated within the Holist order, while still promoting that everybody keeps their own culture and ethnos pure, right? So it basically says that it is unwise for races and ethnicities to mix, yet it celebrates humanity as a whole in all of its diversities. So I think it's quite applicable and quite it is quite broad in its scope, so that many other types of ideologies can also fit under the wings of this philosophical framework. So to conclude, I hope that you value these ideas, and I hope that at least you are triggered to think and contemplate these things. And I hope that you will enjoy the upcoming videos in which I will explain all kinds of topics through the lens of holism. Thank you for your time, and see you next time.